Without further ado, I would like to invite the first speaker, Dr. Doriana Guiducci, to come on stage to present her introductory remarks.
Thank you. So I can. So just this one, right?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks, Marja, for inviting me to this very, let's say, interesting panel. And I am Doriana Guiducci. I'm a spectrum expert at the European Communication Office, which is the technical secretariat of the CPT. CPT is the Conference of European Postal and Telecommunication Administrations, and is a European body that puts together 46 countries, and we deal with regulation for spectrum usage, satellite, and also numbering. Very quickly, to explain what we do, we are one of the parts of these three head circle where regulation is developed in Europe, regulations and standards, together with the European Commission and ETSI. So what I'm talking about today, it's what CPT is doing for, let's say, to help and support the development of 6G. The main activity, let's say, the most recent activities are coming now from the recent conclusion of the World Radio Communication Conference in 2023. And we have just started now the preparation in SEPT of the next conference. And as you may see, I won't go into this detail, but it's really fresh news that we have put together the preparatory group in CPT that deals with the different agenda items. And to do that, as we have many studies to complete in the upcoming 4 years, before 27. We have 3 groups dedicated to science. One group is dedicated to fixed and broadcasting satellite, one to mobile satellite issues, and the CPT has also a specific project team that deals with IMT matters, that is in charge to prepare the work for the conference on IMT matters. As I said, I won't go into details, but I can briefly, let's say, recall what was the main outcome from WSC, very, very, I would say, simplified, in terms of spectrum for IMT. One of the, I would say, the most challenging discussion we had in the preparation of the conference for 4 years was about the 6 gigahertz band, which was finally identified for IMT, while recognizing also the possible additional use for radio LAN and Wi-Fi. This is, I would say, this is just not the end of the story, but the beginning of a lot of work that we still need to be done, and I will come to that in a moment. Then we had for IMT additional bands that were addressed. One of that was the UHF band, for which there were some allocations that regards also CPT countries and future work to do in 2031. I'm saying that because just to show that it's a long process when we talk about regulation about spectrum. It's a very complex matter and takes a lot of time. But coming to what we will need to do by 2027, we have additional bands that are covered in one of the specific agenda items for the conference that are under discussion now. One band around 448 megahertz, for 100 megahertz in region 1 and 3. Region 1 and 3 includes, region 1 includes Europe. Just read this in this way. Then we have bands around the 7-8 gigahertz band, and some more bands to discuss and study around the 15 gigahertz band. So this let's say, this box that you can see on the slide describes the work that we need to do to study possible identification for IMT in 2027 at the conference. Having a look at those 3 bands in Europe, this is an extract from the European Table of Frequency Allocation. It's a tool that CEPT maintains to provide information on how spectrum is used in Europe, and to show that there are, of course, different users concurring for the same spectrum. And if we have many users in those 2 bands, we have even more in the 7 GHz band. And this is, for Europe, a very complex situation, especially for a specific use in the band, which is for a military system. So we can already anticipate that we will have a lot of study to do and a lot of discussion to solve, a lot of issues to solve. Then the other big theme that came out from the conference is direct-to-device communication, direct-to-cell communication, I would say. And this is, we can say this has 2 flavors. This is, of course, this kind of communication regards direct connectivity from space to user equipment. And as I said, we have 2 flavors here. This communication can happen in bands already allocated and used for satellite communication, the so-called mobile satellite service. And then it's, you know that 3GPP is already active in there. We have, you know, possibility is already there, and I would say that regulation is pretty much ready for that. But then we have a new, completely new, I would say, part, which is the second flavor of this big question. It's the usage of spectrum allocated to terrestrial mobile service. And this is something completely new. We do not have regulation. It's actually not even, let's say, I wouldn't say it's not allowed, but it's certainly challenging also the situation we have now. And this is going to take a lot of time in our discussion. And we have started now, and as I said, we have bands that are being investigated for that, bands below 2.7 GHz, especially taking into account the recommendation from the ITUR 1036 that identifies, that regards the band for IMT, and there are a lot of challenges about that. There are interference issues to be studied, coexistence issues to be studied in band, in adjacent band, cross-border issues, and also there are more complex situations that are regard not only spectrum, but also specific European national circumstances related, for instance, to licensing, to specific geographical situation. You know, Europe is pretty much complex. We have a lot of countries, and you know, we are a complex reality. So again, a lot of work to do. Very quickly, because I know that I have probably exhausted all my time, I would just like to mention, we were talking about now what's gonna happen in 4 years at global level, but we are already we are preparing for the global activity, but we have also European activity ongoing. In particular, CPT is developing a 6G roadmap. We used to have, and it was pretty much successful, let's say, experience, a 5G roadmap. Now we are developing a 6G roadmap that should be approved by November this year, and this roadmap is to define the course of actions with respect to many, let's say, tasks related to development of 6G. So harmonization of spectrum, and when I talk about harmonization, I also talk about European harmonization, because as I said, we have the global level, but we have the European level. And on this, we have, I already mentioned WC 2327, and I'd like also to mention that there are other challenges that we are considering, including, for instance, the assessment of existing regulation for 5G, for instance, to approve if it's still, if it is future-proof for 6G systems, and of course, if it's not, we need to update that. I mentioned the 6 gigahertz band. I will really go quickly on that, but I think that we will talk about that in the panel later. But there are pretty many activities ongoing on this 6 gigahertz band, which has been identified for mobile use. And as I said, it's actually a band of strong interest also for RLAN usage. And this poses a lot of questions. Technological coexistence questions, coexistence in terms of two different technologies, feasibility of sharing somehow between these two technologies, coexistence with incumbent users, because we are not talking of a band which wasn't used, it's a heavy used band. So we have many incumbent users, we have satellites, we have fixed service in there. So it's a very complex scenario, and the studies have been initiated in Europe already a few years ago, and it's still ongoing, and we also expect additional activities coming from the European Commission on that to support harmonization. And in the same way, there are exploring activities on direct-to-cell, which are not strictly related to the preparation of the conference. Just to prove how we can have different levels of regulations and different layers of interest, and they can be complementary, I would say. And this is an ongoing work which should lead to some results quite soon. I will skip, let's say, this, but just to mention that, as said, spectrum regulation is regulation, but the use of spectrum is based on coexistence assessment. So that's very important that this is very clear, especially in this forum where we have researchers, academics, and studies. Coexistence studies, technical studies are the basis for an efficient spectrum use. And with this, actually, I think I can conclude, because all of these open points will be dealt with during the panel. Thank you.
Doriana, thank you very much. Our second speaker is Eiman Mohyeldin from Nokia. She is the head of spectrum standardization there, and she will talk about her perspectives on the 6G spectrum. Eiman, please.
I need to do this is the next one. Yes. This one.
This.
Oh, okay. Okay. So, good afternoon, everybody. I hope you had a good lunch break. I'm going to give you just a little bit of a perspective how the spectrum for 6G could look like, and specifically after we have currently came back from WRC 20. We did not came directly from WRC. There is maybe some months, but we felt that it's just had happened yesterday. It was last year in December finalized it, and there are some decisions that is being taken at that point of time, and this will formulate a big ground for how to satisfy the spectrum need in a short and long term. So let me dive into the slides, and let me tell you one thing that maybe everybody is. We are here in this conference, and in this conference is we are dealing with a lot of new application. I just came this morning. I have seen some robot working there, and this is a new application happening. We are testing it, we are seeing it. Have we looked at this application and the new services? What are their requirements? What are performance requirements? How would like to see them? And of course, when we take that look at those new applications, I'm not going to say any specific application, but I'm taking in a generic way that the new applications from the 6G era, they are having also demanding performance requirements. And to satisfy those requirements, we need to understand where we are going to implement them and how much they need. And from the studies, we see that there is a spectrum requirement that is needed for the current generation, the 5G Advanced, and then also the network which is coming afterwards in 2030 and beyond. So for the short term, there is a need of spectrum, that to satisfy the macro deployment, the urban area deployment, it has been estimated between 2025, I mean from that perspective, from 2025 up to 2030, there is a need of approximately 2 gigahertz of spectrum to satisfy even the need which we have started in the 5G and to continue with the 5G advance. And this is only just one portion, and this is on a study which is have been done under the GSMA. Then there is another thing is that what are we going to do for the new application which is coming after the 5G advance, the one which is coming with the 6G, the one which we are currently showing outside? And there are many trials, there are many things. How much spectrum do they need? Taking into consideration the existing spectrum resources currently. And one of the studies is estimated that there is an additionally about 500 to 750 megahertz per network, per operator. But this is depending, of course, on the countries and their needs. So this is an approximate study. You need to do an estimate, an approximate study, which is telling you that if I have, for example, let me take the lower part, and I have 3 operators in one country, and they may need 1.5 gigahertz. From where I can get this additional spectrum? And this is where we have to think about and taking into consideration everything, and based on that study, we have to think where we can implement that 6G in general. And our view is that for the spectrum for 6G, that we need additional spectrum to cater for the new application and the traffic which is going to be growing, and it's debated which to be growing for these applications and the application upcoming. And beside that, there is also the thinking about refarm the bands. And for example, our expectation is that the new bands for 6G could start from the 7.125 up to 15 gigahertz, and there is an agenda item for that discussion for the WRC 27. And maybe refarm other bands in a mid-band as well, bands in the lower part in the UHF to cater for the coverage aspects. As well, the millimeter wave could be also refarmed to take cater of the application, like the hotspots application, things like that one. So to sum it up, there are different layers, and these different layers need to be done. So I would just try to say that the WRC decision were a good decision, where they have identified the upper 6 gigahertz for the IMT usage. This is one step that could take care of the shortfall in a short term, but it also sets the foundation for macro deployment in bands between 7 and 15. And this is for agenda item 1.7, which is under study. We have now created a solid piece of spectrum, and which we can build the 6G on it. So let me tell you one last thing before I close, because I know Marja is looking at me. In the studies which we have been doing for 6G in ITU and outside the ITU in a different organization, it's important to notice and take care is that capacity and coverage are still crucial. Capacity in the mid-bands is needed. Coverage in the UHF is also an important part for the 6G. As well, some kind of spectral efficiency is needed. We need a new spectrum resources to take care of the traffic, the ever-going traffic growth and the new application associated with it. But we need also to answer the question how we can make the sharing, and how sharing by design, how 6G could be designed to be shared with other systems and other incumbents. And I found out that in the vision recommendation, there was one sentence saying that advancing spectrum techniques should be part of the 6G design. And the last thing is that we know that very well that CBT is working on a 6G roadmap. Involvement of all stakeholders is crucial to build on a complete 6G roadmap. So we need to find a balance between the traffic growth and the new application and that one. But most importantly, it should be a harmonized spectrum, because harmonization means sustainability, means economic of scale, means affordability. Thank you.
Thank you, Eiman. Our third speaker will be Marja Suarez, and she is the president of the Dynamic Spectrum Alliance. Marja.
Thanks, Marja. Okay, so hi everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here, and I appreciate the experience of coming back to academic events. I think it's very important, this dialogue and this interaction. For those of you that are not very familiar with the DSA, we are a global association, and we work on dynamic spectrum access, so promoting different types of technologies like spectrum sharing, what we call now dynamic spectrum management systems. And there are many motivations. One of them is, of course, to foster innovation, but also to work on affordable and sustainable connectivity for everyone. I know this is called the 6G spectrum debate, but I wanted to be a little bit challenging here, and I wanted to start discussing about options for broadband connectivity. We have been talking here about 6G, clearly. But at the end, for users, most of the time what it matters is getting the connectivity that is needed, when it is needed and where it is needed. And for that, we need a combination of technologies, and I think that's pretty clear. We have a lot of developments on satellite industry. We have clearly a lot of advances in 5G, 6G technologies, but we keep using many technologies that are part of our daily life, and we will most probably continue using them. And in that landscape, Wi-Fi is one of the technologies that we give for granted, but we use it all the time, and it's also very important for many new applications. And that's the challenge that spectrum regulators face all the time. So and that's my work, that's what I do like every day, it's interacting with them, trying to understand their priorities, and most of the time these are public policy priorities, and trying to get that balance about making sure that all the technologies can continue there and can grow. The biggest spectrum event is WRC. So we had the conference last year, November, December in Dubai. And I took this picture because I really liked the main message. Probably would be very hard to read it there. But these were the closing remarks from the ITU General Secretary, Doreen Bogdan. And she was saying that now networks are more and more convergent. And in particular, she referred to terrestrial IMT networks, so mobile cellular networks, Wi-Fi, satellite technologies, and HIPs. So I think that's a great principle about how to make sure that all these technologies are relevant. And I'm bringing this because there is also a reality about how people and how users get access to the internet. In Europe, in particular, the vast majority of traffic travels on fixed networks. And according to the numbers, and we took into account different countries, France, Germany, Italy, well, you name them, there are 92% of fixed broadband traffic in Europe, and that's using Wi-Fi. So there is a combination of fiber and Wi-Fi. And users are also demanding more and more traffic. And we see it. Mobile traffic is growing very, very fast, but fixed traffic is also growing. So data traffic from fixed networks is going to be about 5 times more than mobile traffic. And I'm bringing this because all these considerations are important for spectrum management decisions. Europe also is relying on fiber, and the Digital Decade Policy Program is targeting a throughput of 1 gigabit per second in every European household by 2030. So that puts a lot of pressure in terms of deployments. And with that reality into account, there is an impact on spectrum matter decisions. Now, I took, this is also a very detailed table I would be happy to discuss further, but there are many application cases that have been defined related to 6G era, right? And we talk about haptic communications, we talk about AR, VR, we talk about mixed reality, and many of them are not exclusively provided by mobile networks. They're also provided by other technologies, such a combination of fiber and Wi-Fi. So I think if we really want to make the right decisions, user needs and users' behavior should be in the center of it. And when we translate many of the principles of 6G to spectrum decisions, we think that wireless communications will need a balance between license exempt, and shared spectrum access. And we need a combination of all of them. So as a summary for this presentation, from the DSA, we support broadband connectivity for everyone, and 6G will be a part of it. For IMT 2030, so the ITU name for 6G to be successful, it must interoperate with other forms of broadband technologies, and these technologies will require access to, again, license exempt, and shared spectrum. A final note, if you want to know more about what we're doing and participate, we will have a summit in Geneva, in Switzerland, in September. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you, Martha. Our final speaker is coming from the operator domain, but not one of the major big MNOs. We have the honor to have Robin Leblon from the Citymesh operator, and he's the CTO there. Welcome, Robin.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Robin. I'm the CTO as a Citymesh. Thank you for the introduction, Marja. Citymesh is probably not known for most people here. It's a pretty international crowd, so I'll give you a very brief intro. We started out about 20 years ago as a Wi-Fi integrator. Actually, if you look at the slide and you look at the blocks, we started on the left with Wi-Fi networks. In 2015, we started building mobile private networks, mostly in Belgium, but actually today all over the world. I think we're probably one of the biggest mobile private network integrators out there. We also bought the Sigfox network in Belgium and the Netherlands, so we also operate an IoT network. And then in 2022, we entered in a JV with Digi out of Romania to basically become the fourth operator in Belgium. I think what's different with Citymesh compared to, let's say, a larger CSP is that we started out as an integrator, and we're now kind of clawing our way into the market to become an operator. Most operators are kind of struggling to do integrator activities. We're the other way around. I thought this was relevant. When I read Marja's introduction, she briefly mentioned the barricades for entry into the mobile market, specifically on the spectrum side. And I can really attest to that because we've gone through a pretty lengthy way of acquiring spectrum. And to be honest, the first years, 2015, we bought our first piece of band 42 spectrum. At that time, the Belgian regulator actually auctioned it off as WiMAX spectrum. No one was interested. We were the only player or the only company that was interested in it. So obviously, we got it at the base price. No auction was needed. And from that point on, it's been a big struggle to actually maintain that spectrum. Because obviously, a year later, everyone realized, well, we're going to need this piece of spectrum for a 5G auction in a couple of years. So we spent, at some point, probably more in lawyer fees trying to hold on to our spectrum, fighting the regulator in Belgium. Luckily, we now have a better relationship with the regulator. But the beginning was very difficult. So barrier to entry is definitely an issue in spectrum allocation. Then in 2020, we had built already quite a lot of mobile private networks. And we realized that with band 42 spectrum, so 3.4 to 3.8, it's relatively difficult to build at least a business-critical, let alone a mission-critical private network. There was an opportunity in Belgium to acquire some FDD spectrum. And because of spectrum capital limitations in Belgium, no real operator, no incumbent was able to purchase that. So we managed to pick that up again, growing our spectrum portfolio. And then in 2022, Belgium had the big 5G auction, and actually the regulator reserved a piece of spectrum for a fourth entrant. Belgium is an expensive telco country. We have a bit of a rusty telco market, I would say. So they were advocating for a new entrant. We bought a full package, and now we have, I don't know, 100 and something megahertz of spectrum all over the board. So I can definitely attest to the struggles as a new player. Another thing I want to mention is just in general, the private mobile market is really just at the beginning. I know we've obviously seen projections like this. We saw projections on IoT 5 years ago, which were crazy. So take it with a grain of salt. But we are actually starting to see that pick up in the market, and it's really early days today. And although there is a bit of spectrum available, many countries now have a local licensing model to acquire typically 3.8 to 4.2 gigahertz of spectrum. And in my opinion, it's not enough. It's a start, but it's not enough, and it's not the right type of spectrum to really build a proper mobile private network. And if you look at this, by 2030, it's going to be a $45 billion market. If it continues to grow at that rate, then somewhere by 2035, it might actually reach similar levels as the public mobile market. So don't underestimate this. Don't forget about private networks when you're discussing 6G allocations. To sum up, well, this one I just said, don't underestimate private networks. Don't overestimate the practical use of sub-terahertz. I've heard a lot about sub-terahertz the last day, yesterday. In our experience, even millimeter wave is a challenge. It's in my opinion, a very niche piece of technology. It's applicable to specific use cases. It can solve a problem, but it's not going to solve a CSP type of national coverage problem. We've seen the US invest heavily. The networks are underused, and they're not a great success. And thirdly, another thing that we've noticed in the regulation around 5G spectrum, there's some technical limitations, especially on band 42. For example, subframe structures are, in most European countries, limited or fixed. This is a problem, in my opinion. We need to be more flexible there, and we need to leave a bit more room for technical innovations. They're operators, smaller players, integrators. They need some more room there to play around. These subframe structures are focused on typical public networks, large downlink capacity, low uplink capacity. This is true today for most public networks. In the future, things might change dramatically. We might need a lot more uplink. So we need more wiggle room there. We need more room from the regulators to be able to innovate on the spectrum that's going to be available. That concludes it for me today.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the great presentations. Now we have heard different perspectives about the big topic of 6G spectrum. I'm encouraging you to come up with your own questions for the panel. I've made up some questions that I will start with, but then we will also take your questions because we have plenty of time for the Q&A session. If I go forward and share the questions that I have listed here, starting from the first one. Just some background information. This EuCNC is a nice venue for having this conversation. I remember back in 2017 when we, the University of Oulu, organized the EuCNC in Oulu, and Mikko Uusitalo was facilitating a panel on 5G spectrum, and I was speaking at that panel, and I was talking about local micro-operators that the University of Oulu was investigating very heavily, and local spectrum licensing models. and they became a reality in this 5G spectrum time. It was the first time those were really debated within this venue, and now we're in the same position here, starting the 6G spectrum debate, and that's why my first question is, what should be done differently in spectrum management in the 6G era? 5G era introduced local licensing. It also introduced millimeter waves. Two different things already in itself. So what should be done differently? And I would like to hear your responses on this. Who would like to start?
Can I? Oh.
Yes,
Doriana, yes.
Oh, I can start, and then we can go on. What should be done differently? You know, the good news in spectrum management is there's always something can do differently, better, and is never enough. So this is why we have, you know, spectrum management. And certainly there are things that, you know, I wouldn't talk about changing as like, you know, totally changing everything. I see spectrum management as a continuous evolution. Some of the things we are talking about today, as you said, they have the roots in some years ago. And maybe at that time they were not ready, but they are now. And maybe they are not fully ready, but they will become. So sharing, for instance, is one thing that needs to be further promoted for many reasons, you know, for not only for efficient use. We've always talked about spectrum sharing in terms of efficiency. But now it's more than that. It's a need to make room for everyone. It's a need to face increasing level of convergence. And I would say that, and we can probably elaborate further on that, it's also a need to fulfill sustainability. So there are different aspects, and this is certainly something that we need to consider. That's more, but I don't want to hijack the panel. Thank you.
Eiman.
I would say that the spectrum management currently is quite good. There is a need to add a little bit more of adaptability and flexibility, and specifically in how to introduce the sharing techniques and how to use them. However, this is need to come with a condition that there are investment, there are certainty that need to be still guaranteed. So the current spectrum management regime is quite good for innovation. Adding a little bit of flexibility is good, but we have also to think about spectrum is a resources where there is business model behind it, and there is need to be certainty on and continuity of services. Like, for example, I got the question always, why do you need a new band for 6G? You have to understand refarming is also have some kind of legal conditions. To refarm a band, you need certain years to get it. And you wanted to have a band to start these 6G application in day one, and in that response, you need to have a band. So this is the regime of the spectrum management currently is quite good enough. A bit of adding spectrum sharing and dynamic spectrum management to it would be desirable.
Thank you. Marja.
Well, I try to cover that in my presentation. I think that the main purpose is focusing on users. And I think that will be a way to trigger competitiveness for Europe and also to trigger economic benefit. So I think there is always a link between spectrum management and economic benefit. But it's not necessarily only coming from spectrum auctions or spectrum fees. It's about making sure that spectrum is available at the right time for the right applications. So I think what should be considered in this case is the reality of the ecosystem, meaning which are the needs, which are the trends, and trying to find that balance. In the past, and I'm going to be a little bit challenging here, some people say, yeah, 5G will be a network of networks, but then it translated into more spectrum for IMT. exclusively. I mean, that 5G hyper became that. And we are seeing that there are many applications that are out of the traditional spectrum licensing frameworks. You talk about private networks. There are so many applications. There is a growing ecosystem of internet service providers at local level. Of course, there is license-exempt spectrum needs. So I think that we should balance the promise. I mean, to avoid to make it too like just a trend, but try to not have that big gap between the promise and the reality. I think that's important.
Robin.
Well, I have little to add to that. I think most has been said. One thing maybe is that spectrum is a scarce resource, and today it's basically auctioned off to the highest bidders in most cases, and generally that will be a large CSP. There's some measures in place today that already improve that. There's some local licensing. I think a lot of the spectrum for 6G, not the refarmed part, but the newer parts, will have much more innovative and niche applications, and we need to find a way to award spectrum to the right parties in the right way, and not just auction it off to a large CSP.
Thank you, and this leads to the next question. Actually, 2 weeks ago, I facilitated another panel on 6G spectrum in another event, and the question about spectrum sharing there did not receive much success there, so there was very little spectrum sharing even mentioned. But you've already, almost all of you have mentioned spectrum sharing in your presentation. So what is the role of spectrum sharing, dynamic spectrum access in 6G? Who wants to start?
Sure,
Yes,
I'll take it, but it boils down a bit to the same thing, I think. We need more flexible ways to award it, both at a technology level. There needs to be some more freedom, ideally, at the type of entity that is actually awarded the spectrum, be it localized, be it perhaps it should be more based on merit, and whoever can, because the goal is to serve the public, right? It's a scarce resource that we all own, and it should serve the general public. And sharing and dynamic allocation should be based on merit. Who can provide the most value to the largest part of either a small or large community with that piece of spectrum? That should be, in my humble opinion, the foundation for how we share it and how we award it.
Who is Eiman, please?
I believe there are a lot of sharing mechanisms, technology that's supporting sharing mechanisms like database, sensing. These are a more dynamic way. But the question is always not how it's going to play a role, but the question is how these are going to be stable and being regulated in a stable way that there will be mutual benefit between the incumbents that they are using the spectrum. For example, if I'm using my connectivity, I don't want it to be interrupted because I have to share the resources with others. This is regardless whether it's a public network or a private network. And specifically for private network, you need to be careful because you are doing with some critical applications like, for example, mining, or this is safety of life. Then I need to have a guarantee of that resources and I want to share it. But if there is a possibility to share it and regulate it with a way that is not hampering the network in itself, why not? But it's always you have to come and assess how this spectrum sharing added a value or is bringing disruption to a running network where there is also some other aspects related to it.
Marja.
Yeah, I would say that there are so many tools available. In the past, every time we were talking about dynamic spectrum management systems, like the first reaction for many regulators was like, that's a change. I prefer my black and white system. I give exclusive license. I know how to manage that, and it's easy. I think that in 6G era, it would be important to think about systems that are created with that initial configuration of dynamic spectrum access, because that will simplify the adoption. Right now, there is a difference between technology and regulation in many countries. We have some forward-thinking countries that have very advanced regulations in place. I'm thinking about Canada, US, now Saudi Arabia also. Of course, in Europe, there have been many projects about dynamic spectrum access. And I think it has a lot to offer, you know, like if you can manage access and grant access to spectrum in a dynamic way. Let me give you an example. Internet access, DNS, domain name service. That's a very simple example of dynamic access. You get your IP address. You don't care what the number is, how it is configured. You just use it. I think in the future, we should be able to have this type of systems that are completely transparent for the user, but just give opportunities for a larger ecosystem and for better use of a scarce resource.
Doriana.
I would turn your interesting question in the other way. You know, considering how 6G, what 6G will bring, this use case scenario that we have, the complexity that 6G has, can we really do without sharing? That's actually, I think it's a kind of self-answering question. But indeed, we have to deal with spectrum sharing. We have a lot of points that still need to be solved, you know. But as I mentioned, you know, Eiman this morning said something very provocative, but I like that, you know. AI, in the end, is a kind of evolution of sensing. So actually, you know, it's a nice way to see things. We've been talking about technology sharing in the past. We haven't the solution. We have the clear example, for instance, of intelligent transport system. It's a long-standing debate, two different technologies that are still struggling to coexist. And we have similar questions to solve. We have more and more users that want to use the same spectrum, and exclusivity not only is not a way anymore, but it's not also a way because those different communities, these different worlds, they used to be separate, are converging. They want to be together. So they are asking to be together. They do not ask to be separate. So the only way they have is to share spectrum and resources. So and you're talking about databases to share spectrum. We've been talking about that for years, you know, and we know a lot. We need to learn how to use, how to, let's say, take advantage of what we have studied, of what we've been doing in the last years, and take a further step and make it happen. So I think that's what we need to do now.
Absolutely. Next, the audience, you will have the opportunity to ask questions from this panel. Who would like to start? Oh, there. Do we have a microphone there? Yes.
I wonder, okay, you can hear me. I have a question which is not really spectrum regulatory issue in a sense, but it's related to auction. Ari Pottu, by the way, from University of Oulu. The question is the following. We have different auctioning models in the world. In some countries, governments and the regulators ask for billions of euros for a license. And in some countries, the price is in the rules how to deploy the network. For instance, 99% population coverage. Now, this obviously relates to national carriers. But what is your view? Which approach should we choose? Go for the requirements or go for the money?
Thank you, Ari. Who would like to answer? Maybe we start from the... Okay, Martha, please.
Okay.
Yes.
I think the trade-off that should be understood in that dynamics is that if the fees for spectrum are too high, then you're going to affect investment. And if you only rely on a few stakeholders to deploy mobile networks, and if they don't have the financial conditions to do it, that's a challenge, because then at the end, users won't get the service. And not only users, but industry won't get the economic benefits of accessing that spectrum. One of the things that we try to explain to regulators, and we have done as DSA, if you go to our website, there are many studies. In many cases, there is more impact at the end of having license exempt, for example, or share or flexible frameworks for spectrum as assignment than having licensing fees, because at the end, you just get a broader ecosystem, and then you get more stakeholders investing, and also more final access there. However, we should also understand that there are those policies, and I'm surprised many times when I hear, because that's one of the discussions, but then when you go to other groups and decisions, it's surprising to hear some people say, oh no, don't consider license exempt because I will pay you for the spectrum. So sometimes it's kind of contradictory. And for regulators, they are faced also to their policy decisions, and sometimes they need money to invest in other areas, not necessarily ICT sector. But from the perspective of DSA, it's always better to have the spectrum used, to make sure that it is in the market, it is available, and someone is using it to provide connectivity. Or not only connectivity, there are many other applications, but that is really accessible for what is needed.
I think if I may add something to that, one thing you do also see is any kind of party with sufficient financial capacity simply even buying spectrum to keep it out of the market for a couple of years, to just slow others down. So I think it's a very difficult question to solve. Obviously, you need people involved or stakeholders involved that have the means to actually use it and monetize it. But in my opinion, it's a bit broken for the moment as well, because there's barriers to entry, and you see carriers spending just to keep spectrum out of the market. So I think it needs to be a combination of both, and I know that mostly there's coverage in most countries. There's coverage requirements connected to a purchase, but yeah, by that time the damage has been done, and you've kept a competitor out of the market. So yeah, it needs to be a combination. I think we need to be smarter about it, and maybe we need to rethink the entire model. Maybe you should be paying for whatever you send over the spectrum. Maybe that's a way to handle it, or maybe we need to just kind of rethink the model, because just in general, the big auction model today, I don't think it's sustainable with innovations that are coming up.
More questions from the audience? There.
Hi, thank you very much for this discussion. It's interesting, and actually I jumped when you mentioned the word model. I was looking at this nice environment, right? And I was looking at kind of frequency requirements in terms of bandwidth that we envisage that will be needed for 6G. Now that will mean much higher frequencies, which will have much tougher propagation conditions, which means we are going to increasingly move towards a localized spectrum world. Why does this need to be regulated? It's my room. Get out of my room. I'm not going to interfere to anybody outside it. So, sorry about this thing about models. I really don't understand why we can't move in this direction in the future.
Thank you.
Doriana. This is actually a very interesting question. And actually, I don't have an answer, but I must say that some time ago, this was a question that ourselves as regulator, we were asking ourselves. Going up to frequencies, and I think we are talking about, let's say, above, I mean, in the terahertz range, probably. It's greenfield. We do not, above, you know, certain, around 300 gigahertz, we do not even have regulation at all, you know. And even above 100 gigahertz, we do not have much, except in Europe, except something about fixed service and scientific uses, but that's, let's say, I would keep them aside for the moment. So which kind of needs for regulations are there for this range? And do we need a regulation? Or maybe do we need some more, you know, is that an opportunity to assess and maybe test novel models in a dynamic way in a less regulated environment? So this is actually, I think, I don't have an answer, and honestly, I don't know if anybody has got an answer, I will be happy to hear. But having said that, this is just one of the possible uses, because of course, and this is probably a little bit off topic, but the use of, we were talking about, you know, you need more spectrum, so we need to go to higher spectrum. That's partially true, you know, it's just part of the picture, is for certain uses, for sure, but this is not how we can solve all the demand we have in terms of spectrum. But this is certainly an open point. I agree. Thank you.
Eiman.
Yes, it's indeed an interesting question. But let me turn the question back and looking at, let's say, the sub-terahertz discussion. Is it over-regulated? Do we need to have a light regulation? There are a lot of models that are existing, but you have to, we have to understand the application. And if you are going to use this piece of spectrum from a technology point of view with, let's say, sub-terahertz, you are going to use it for sensing, you wanted to use it for different application, and you wanted to have an interference-free. Interference-free means that there is no disruption in using that application, even if you are using indoor. The question is always, you don't want to be interfered from outside. You don't want to have that interference. And I guess this is why the regulation is there, is for the cases of to protect the services or the application currently are there. But they need not to be hampering or delaying the innovation into that sense. So there could be other models that like licensing, for example, or other models of spectrum management can be applicable in a case of you have an indoor application, but you don't want that indoor applications to be stopped or disrupted. And one example, when I say I came in this morning, I saw there was a roboter going, yeah? And it's around just several meters. You don't want to have this connection being disrupted, because then the operation will fall down. And this is why I should be a little bit more flexible as a vendor, not as a regulatory body. But in that case, I wanted to think that interference is going to disrupt the operation and it needs to be regulated. So this is maybe one aspect, yeah. But you could use a lightweight regulation for that case.
That definitely is a topic also for the research community to address in parallel when studying the bands, also how to regulate them. More questions from the audience? Oh, there's one.
It's the curious corner.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. So, Selma Saidi from Technical University of Braunschweig, Germany. So I will start with a disclaimer. So I'm coming from the compute community, not the communication community, and furthermore, embedded compute. So when we think about simply the processor that you have in your mobile phone or in a car or in a plane and so on. Dealing with the scarcity of resources and the dynamic management of resources is what we do every day. Because we have to share resources, and what we need, especially if we are, for example, in safety critical kind of context or application, we provide guarantees on when do we access, again, these resources, or at least it's okay if also the resource is not available for a given point of time, but are we able to bound this time? And then if we are able to do that, then what we do, we adapt the applications based on that during the application development. But just to say what we have methods to do that, but there is also the question of regulation and so on. I understand this is an issue. Maybe it's not so, and also the business model. I understand also this is important. But what I would like to point out or bring to the discussion is that what we usually use or factor in is this cross-layer system-level approach, meaning that we are aware of what the application requirements are and the resources and the other way around. So the application are also aware of what are the resources that are there. And I'm wondering whether this, or how far in the development of 6G, for example, is this cross-layer, let's say, kind of thinking or information, is there enabled or is foreseen to be enabled in order to do something, let's say, smarter and efficient in that direction?
Thank you. Marta, yes.
In terms of 6G, at this point, of course, there are no networks, it's only a vision. So let me please go to existing cases. And that would be, for example, 5G, 4G. So we had a very particular case in the US in the 3.5 gigahertz band, from 3550 to 3700, because that band is used by Department of Defense, and there are many applications in that band. And that's a crucial band for 5G. So they had to implement, I mean, US had to implement a very sophisticated system. It's not needed in other countries necessarily, but it proves the concept and it proves how well it works. So basically, it is sensing the spectrum and usage of the band by those that are incumbents and have priority. So there are three layers, the three tiers. The first one is for those that are incumbents and have been using that band forever, that they were not moved to other bands, the band was not clean, they stay there. There is a second tier of what we call priority access licenses, so that's for mobile operators, but not exclusively for them. I mean, you could have any stakeholder getting a license for localized access, and they use it, and then you have a general authorized access. And all that is managed by a software system that is called SAS. It has been there on the market for more than 4 years, zero problems of harmful interference. And I like to really emphasize that, because if you have defense systems operating in the band, and you can say it and you can claim it works, I mean, there haven't been any problems in terms of access. And it had a lot of licensees at the end. So we recently had a report from ITS in the US, and it was indicating that more than 80% of the users were getting the general authorized access, so they were not paying for a license, they were just accessing the spectrum when the others were not using it. So to answer your question, there are systems there, they have been proven, and if it worked for 4G, I'm sure with all the advancement we are having in AI, in blockchain, in hardware development, we just heard a lot, many of that this morning, I'm sure this can be done. I mean, this is not a fantasy, this is not a promise, this is something that could be realistically implemented.
More questions?
Oh, sorry.
There.
Thanks, Maria. Obviously, this is the naughty corner of the room because he asks the questions. I'm Bernard Hunt from the University of Surrey. Obviously, we don't know yet what 6G is, but one of the hot topics, not only in the research community, but now 3GPP, ETSI looking at it, is integrated sensing and communications, where we're not talking about spectrum sensing, but localization, environment sensing, user activity sensing. Are the spectrum regimes we have in process at the moment for licensing and management ready and appropriate for managing this multi-use of spectrum? And if not, what is needed? And obviously then from my perspective, what technical input is needed from the research community to assist in these processes? Thank you.
Thank you.
And I think it boils down again to, I really liked your example from the US. If you take the analogy of the previous question, that works because you have like a CPU scheduler which knows everything and which has all the information, which distributes the resources, right? That's exactly what that system in the US is doing. I think that's what every regulator should be doing with their spectrum. Their goal has to be to distribute the spectrum as well as possible and make sure that it's used. For that, the regulator needs to be innovative, needs to keep up with the technology innovations. It needs to keep up with the stakeholders. So, a system like what's been deployed in the US, I think, solves almost all of it. But that requires very strong regulators, and that works in the US because the US is a large country with plenty of funding to be able to build such a complex system. I don't think at a local European country, I don't see the Belgian regulator building this very quickly, to be honest. So maybe there needs to be more push and more investment at a European level to facilitate these kinds of systems, to take in the requirements from academics, from research, from building owners, from whoever needs spectrum. And maybe we need a much stronger and much more innovation at a European regulator level to facilitate all of that.
I think that, of course, we have let's say, national issues or national situations in Europe. But nevertheless, we have also, let's say, experience in the past. I'm thinking not about, in this specific case, it was not sensing, but the case of TV white spaces, for instance. We had, sensing was used for specific incumbents, for instance, or there was the geolocation approach. So I wouldn't say that the regulation is ready, but I wouldn't even say that the regulation is not ready at all. In terms of connectivity, I see certainly something which has to be considered. You know, we have the case of the US with the 3.5 gigahertz band in the CBRS. It was a very successful case, and it was the same time when Europe was talking more about license share access, for instance, which didn't really take up here, but it's still a good. Let's say, a good experiment, and I think we learned a lot from that, and we still can take a lot from what we learned. But what I was trying to elaborate is that if we talk about connectivity now, you know, in the end, the user wants to have connectivity. So if we are talking about layers, about how to exploit resources, the user actually do not care how this person gets connectivity. They want to get connectivity. And on this, probably the regulation is not ready yet. For instance, because we are now talking about, is that terrestrial service? Is that satellite service? In the past, those words used to be, let me use this, probably it's a little bit too strong, but like two different silos. No, regulation was for one word in a way and for another word in another way. So if we need to put together these two words for the benefit of the end user, who, as I said, doesn't really care how connectivity is delivered to the end user, we need to make something. We need to work on that. And regulation probably is not ready there. Thank you.
Eiman.
When Doriana was speaking, I would say that the regulation started to be ready. And one example is there is a direction towards convergence. And one of the aspects that is currently under discussion, and one of them, they have been regulated before in the last WRC, it's the HIPS. So HIPS is a kind of like you are going to have an overlay network over the over a public network. and you will use it for a certain kind. And they have created a framework for that one. And this is how I see it, as a convergence, and they have created a framework for that one. The second experience is coming with a new agenda item, is about how to use the mobile network for to complement, as a supplementary complementary issue, is to add a satellite over it. This is called direct to cell. This is an agenda item called agenda item 1.13. It's about mobile satellite services using or sharing the public network. And this is one of the things that, this is an experience that we are going to live and get it in the WRC 27, and maybe we come something out of it. But we don't have to forget the European experience on licensed spectrum access. And this was an experience, and there were trials on it, and it was successful, but it did not come into implementation. And maybe we can go back again and try to dig a little bit more. And it's even being standardized in HC. It's called Evolved License Sharing Access. There is a lot of experience, there is a lot of decisions and standards there. We just need to look at them again and reshuffle them again and try to see if there is an update needed to cater for specific things about like this cross-layer or different user using the same bands.
Yeah.
Thank
that was a very interesting question for Bernard about this, how the technical capabilities studied for 6G are really impacted by the different frequency bands. We have time for more questions, so this is your opportunity to ask the panel there at the corner.
Completely this side.
Thank you very much. From the very first presentation, I believe it was presented what are the frequency bands which are going to be considered at WRC 27, going up to what they call FR3, I believe. There is no agenda item on sub-terahertz band, so is this something which is potentially hampering the development of 6G, or will there be future agenda items that will carry it over to WRC 30 or whatever? What are the plans on that?
Thank you, Bernard. Eiman, please.
Very, very good question, and came on time, and I always have been asked this question. We did not forget the sub-terahertz while we were looking at agenda item 1.7. I have just to say that ITUR Working Party 5D have completed its visibility study on how to use IMT in bands above 100 gigahertz. The report is yet to be published. But on the time of the WRC, it was not in the status that it could create an agenda item for that study with the specific of the bands. Luckily, in WRC 23, they are already an initial agenda item for the subsequent WRC. That means WRC 20. When we come to 27, we are going to study if it's going to be an agenda item or not. So it's included in a subsequent WRC 31st. So sub-terahertz is not yet out of the picture, but it was meant and seen as still in research. It needs a little bit of a status to move a little bit in a mature status before we can study it as an agenda item. Thank you.
Thank you. More questions?
Maybe from that side?
For clarity.
Oh, let's go back to this side then.
No, in the middle. No.
More questions? There, yes.
Yeah, if I may again, sorry for monopolizing the mic. I think again in the first presentation, it was presented this notion, also under the ITU framework, to use mobile terrestrial frequencies, so frequencies allocated to the mobile service terrestrial, potentially being used by NTN, non-terrestrial networks, on a shared basis ad hoc. So is it any realistic to believe that operators who have paid an arm and a leg their terrestrial spectrum will accept to share it for users which do not pay for their spectrum? Is this, am I missing something here? Or?
Thank you, Bernard.
Maybe one thing I can add to that one. We've actually started discussions with a company that's today already offering direct-to-cell services. You would, as an operator, you would leverage a piece of your own spectrum for that. That makes sense, depending on the type of territory you're trying to cover. It might even be a solid alternative to a macro rollout for very sparse environments. So the way that we've looked at it as a CSP, from a CSP perspective, you would simply use a piece of your own spectrum and potentially be able to offset cost of your macro network for that. So we would never perceive it to be shared. One thing which might make sense on top of that is approaching it from a neutral host perspective, and maybe one operator taking the lead in that, and then offering up capacity in a neutral host scenario. But that's not allowed yet in Europe, as far as I'm concerned.
Yes, it's not seen as you are going to share the resources with the service provider, the MNOs, the public network. It means that you are going to complement it or do a supplementary coverage where there is no coverage. So this is the idea of this study about NTN and the usage with it. My personal view here, for Europe, we don't have the issue of the coverage. It could be somewhere other places that there is a coverage issue and that needs to be done through this NTN component. But for Europe, we need to study it. We need to study, is it applicable in Europe or not? Because the idea of it is to use the network of the MNOs. It's going to be a mutual agreement between the satellite operator and the public network operator, between them, how to use it and how to create a network of it. I have mentioned previously there is the HIPS, framework, and I'm expecting also that for this NTN, similar framework could be also applicable for this direct-to-cell. The HIPS is using the same MNOs network, but they are going to use it's not drones, it's high platform and at a certain kind of an attitude. And then you are going to use the similar network for that one to create this connectivity. And this was seen is a good application. And we think it's a good additional application to what kind of an application and services that public network is doing it. Similarly for NTN, and we know that, for example, in the US, there is T-Mobile have offered it, and if we have an operator that have offered such a kind of a complementary services, then we think it's not disrupting too much his network. That is the view I can say about this direct-to-device.
Thank you. Yes, Robin.
In the case of T-Mobile, it's on T-Mobile spectrum.
Yeah, it's
T-Mobile giving a piece of spectrum to SpaceX to basically modulate the signal for them. So it does boil down to an operator sacrificing a piece of spectrum, I guess.
Now it's time for the last question, and it'll be from my ready-made list of questions, the last question. Earlier today, we learned in the presentations from the European Commission and the SNA's joint undertaking that sustainability is a very important thing in the 6G R&D, especially covering 3 pillars: environmental, social, and environmental sustainability perspective. So my final closing question to all of you is that what could sustainability mean in the context of spectrum management for 6G? Doriana,
Shall I start? Yes, certainly it's a very, I would say, up-to-date topic. Sustainability is, you mentioned that, you've been part of that, is finally, I would say, part of spectrum management and also satellite. So sustainability has many faces when we talk about spectrum management, because it's certainly about uses of spectrum, it's about uses of orbits, certainly. It's energy efficiency. So we have different layers, and it's waste management, it's everything. It's very, very complex. And but the good thing is that even after the WRC, for instance, now even in CPT, we have started talking about sustainability from the very beginning of the process. So we had, as I said, we had just started the preparation. And for the specific, we decided to start with discussing among European administrations about space sustainability. And we are just, let's say, setting the scene on what we would like to do. But we also agreed that we start from there. And then within this group in charge of preparing the conference, we will start from there, and then we will bring forward to a wider audience within CEPT the whole discussion about sustainability. So as I would say that now we are still at the beginning, but the important message here is that we have started considering just now, starting from there, together with the agenda items and everything else.
Great. Eiman.
Sustainability is a very, very big word. Okay, let me summarize it in two aspects that I can see it related to spectrum management. One of the things is that I look at it as refarming. Refarming certain kind of frequency bands is for me a sustainability issue or contribute to sustainability. The other example I can say, reusing of existing sites. That means you are not going to have additional sites, you are not going to have additional construction, you're not going to have additional power resources. This is also part of sustainability because it will contribute from an energy efficiency point of view. Thank you.
Thank you. Marta.
Yeah, I agree it's a very big question. But I think we need to take into account the timeline. We need to look at the past and see what didn't work. We need to look at the current situation and then plan for the future. Let me explain a couple of examples. In the past, every time we were talking about spectrum, we were targeting like the band, right? There is a band, one band for 4G, one band for 5G. And I see that trend also to see these should be the bands for 6G. But then when you look back and you see where are most of the deployments, at the end, that's not necessarily at those target bands. We have the case of millimeter waves. Now with the 5G observatory in Europe, if you look, most of the base stations in Europe are not using 3.5 gigahertz. They are still using other bands like 1.8 because of that replacements of antennas. So I think sustainability should be seen in terms of environmental sustainability. I think it's making the most sense for the final purpose. Let me give another example. If the final purpose is broadband connectivity, for example, for indoors, we clearly see it is better to have a combination of fiber than Wi-Fi instead of having outdoor base stations trying to provide that indoors connectivity. And that is related to spectrum decision, for example, about the future of the 6 gigahertz band, because that band, and there are different industry positions, but we are clearly supporting that band for Wi-Fi. So there is a link, but it's not just a simple thing. You cannot look at that like a piece of it. It's really interrelated to many other aspects. So that's something that should be at the center and should be really critical. And that was also a question about universities and research. Please keep that critical perspective because we need it.
Robin.
I think what we're doing in Belgium is actually building an MOCN network with two operators on top of it, Citymesh and DG, our partner. So we have basically two PLMN IDs being broadcasted on one network. And we looked at different ways as well. And that kind of, at some night in the office, ended up in a back of the envelope calculation of power usage of networks. And so there will now basically be three to four RAN deployments in Belgium. We already have two other operators building a network together. But actually, if you significantly want to decrease the power usage of a mobile network, the most logical solution, which has a huge benefit, is just building one network, one huge neutral host network, and offering capacity and selling off capacity on that. I know that's a very radical idea, and then we're back to state-owned companies and this and that. I know that's not the way forward, but if via spectrum regulation we can try to push the industry to cooperate more and to be building less networks, less national networks, and really through financial incentive, through whatever incentive, push the industry to work together more, to put less hardware out there, to put less macro out there, definitely. Blasting 500 watts on 700 megahertz to penetrate a building with heat-resistant windows is madness. Solve that from the inside, obviously. But that needs to be better regulated. The UK is doing a very good job there, where you see building owners installing DAS systems and actually participating in that and facilitating good coverage inside the building. So I think if we only take the CO2 footprint part of sustainability, I think from a spectrum regulation perspective, there's much that we can do to push CSPs and other players in the industry to use a lot less power.
Thank you. That question concludes this first panel of the EuCNC 6G Summit 2024. Thank you for joining us for this great 6G spectrum debate panel. Thank you.